The mansion stood silent, the kind of silence that echoed louder than 1,000 voices. The cold, dimly lit hallways whispered secrets of the empire that once ruled the criminal underworld. In the center lay the body of Don Vincenzo Martelli, the infamous Mafia kingpin, sprawled across the marble floor in a pool of his own blood. The shot had been clean, professional, someone who knew exactly how to kill without leaving a trace. I knelt beside him, my heart pounding. His lifeless eyes stared up at me, yet in that stillness I felt more fear than relief. The phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. It's done. The king is dead. As I read the words, a wave of dread washed over me. In this world, power doesn't die, it only shifts. Who had orchestrated this? And why? The question haunted me as I stood up, the weight of what was coming next settling on my shoulders. I stood there frozen in the silence, knowing that the game had just changed. Don Vincenzo's death wasn't a random act, it was part of something much larger. Someone was pulling the strings, and they weren't finished yet. A chill ran down my spine as I walked out of the mansion, every step echoing in the darkness. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message. And I had to find out who sent it. As I reached the outside, I looked around, searching for answers. My instincts told me that whoever orchestrated this wasn't far behind. The city's skyline glimmered in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness around me. I knew I wasn't alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. From the shadows, a figure approached. The figure stepped forward, revealing themselves to be a man, tall, imposing, dressed in black. His face was partially obscured by a cap, but there was something about him that felt familiar. He spoke softly, "You don't know who's really pulling the strings, do you?" The words hung in the air like a warning, and I instinctively took a step back. "Who are you?" I demanded. His smile was thin, cold. "I'm the one who makes sure the empire doesn't fall apart. And you're in deeper than you think." The man didn't wait for me to speak again. "I've been watching you, David. You've been trying to dismantle the empire from the inside, but you're not the first and you won't be the last." He stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You're playing a game you don't understand. And the truth will cost you more than you can imagine." He turned to leave, but not before throwing one last piece of information into the air. "Don Vincenzo wasn't the only puppet in this game. You've been one too." I spent the next few hours pacing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Don Vincenzo's death was only the tip of the iceberg. The mysterious man's warning kept echoing in my mind. "You're playing a game you don't understand." Who was he? And how did he know so much about me? I needed answers. The only way to get them was to dive deeper into the darkness I had been trying to escape. But the deeper I went, the more I realized that escaping wasn't an option anymore. This web of power, deceit, and crime had already ensnared me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that every move I made was being tracked. The phone call, the cryptic message, it all led back to the same conclusion. Whoever had orchestrated Vincenzo's death was far more powerful than anyone had realized. And I was about to learn just how far the reach of this hidden empire extended. There was one place I could go, a place where the Underworld's secrets were kept, the old club where the Mafia's true power was always discussed, away from prying eyes. But I had to be careful. The last time I went there, I barely escaped with my life. Inside, I found an old informant, a man who had once worked as an enforcer for the Martelli family. He had vanished after the family fell apart, but I knew he still had ties to the underground. I approached him cautiously, not sure if he would betray me or help. "You know who killed Vincenzo?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man looked up slowly, his eyes betraying years of fear and regret. "You're not ready for this, David," he said hoarsely. "What you're looking for, it's bigger than you can imagine." The informant leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Vincenzo wasn't just the kingpin, he was a pawn too. And you, David, you're part of a much larger game." I could feel the weight of his words. the coldness in his eyes as he spoke of forces I couldn't even comprehend. The syndicates, the cartels, they answer to someone else. Someone higher, someone you'll never be able to touch. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just about mafia families anymore. This was about power on a global scale, and it was all controlled by a hidden hand. "Who is it?" I asked, desperate for answers. Before he could answer, the door to the club slammed open. A group of men in suits stepped inside, their presence commanding immediate attention. I recognized one of them, Marco Russo, an enforcer for the rival Calabrese family. He locked eyes with me, and in that instant, I knew things were about to get much worse. The informant's face went pale as he stood up. "Get out of here, David. Now," he whispered urgently. But it was too late. Marco was already walking toward us. There was no escape. Marco's men surrounded me, their presence like a suffocating cloud. "David," Marco said, his voice low and deliberate, "you've been asking questions you shouldn't be asking." I tried to remain calm, but the air was thick with tension. "I'm just looking for answers," I replied, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Marco smirked. "The truth doesn't come for free, and sometimes it costs more than you're willing to pay." My heart raced, but I couldn't back down now. If I wanted to bring down the empire, I needed to know who was pulling the strings, even if it meant facing Marco's wrath. Marco motioned for his men to step aside, allowing him to approach. His gaze never wavered. "You were one of Vincenzo's closest. But that doesn't matter now. You're a liability," he said, stepping closer. I felt the sweat bead on my brow as he circled me, sizing me up. I couldn't let fear show. I needed to stay focused. "What happened to Vincenzo?" I asked again, my voice barely a whisper, but the question hung in the air like a threat. Marco paused, his lips curling into a smirk. "Vincenzo was never the real power. You should figured that out a long time ago." Marco stepped back, signaling for his men to stay put. "There's someone above Vincenzo," he said. "Someone who's been pulling the strings from the beginning." I leaned in, desperate for more. Who? I asked. Marco's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps. "You won't find them by asking questions," he replied cryptically. "But if you really want to know, go to the old warehouse on the east side. There's someone there who can tell you more. But be careful. There are eyes everywhere now." My heart raced. This was it, the lead I'd been searching for. But I had no idea what I was walking into. I left the club with a heavy heart, the weight of Marco's words sinking in. The old warehouse on the east side was a place I knew all too well, a former arms depot, now abandoned and forgotten. It was the perfect location for secrets to fester. But as I drove there, the sinking feeling in my gut told me I wasn't the only one who had this lead. I parked a few blocks away and approached the warehouse on foot, staying in the shadows. The wind howled through the cracked windows as I peered through the foggy glass. I could make out two figures moving inside, their silhouettes faint but unmistakable. My hand instinctively went to the gun tucked at my waist. It was now or never. I pushed open the rusty door, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, the figures became clearer. Two men, talking in hushed tones. One of them was an older man, his face lined with years of hard living. The other was someone I didn't recognize, but his presence felt menacing. As I stepped further into the warehouse, the floor creaked beneath my feet, alerting them to my presence. They both turned to face me, eyes narrowing. "I knew you'd come," the older man said, his voice low and gravelly. "But you're too late. The game's already over." The older man's words lingered in the air like a death sentence. "You're too late, kid," he repeated, his voice carrying a tone of finality. I stepped forward, trying to mask the panic rising in my chest. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the fear I was feeling. The younger man standing next to him cracked a smile. "You've been chasing shadows, David. The true power's never where you think it is." My stomach sank. My entire world had been a lie. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit, but the picture was one I never expected. I gripped the handle of my gun, my mind racing. "Where is he?" I demanded. The older man let out a deep sigh, as if he had expected this moment. The older man eyed me, his gaze cold and calculating. "You're looking for the boss," he said. "But you've been asking the wrong questions. The person you're really hunting is someone closer than you think." My breath caught in my throat. "What the hell are you talking about?" I snapped, but the older man remained calm. "The empire you're chasing is controlled by more than just one man. The king is dead, yes, but the real puppeteer remains hidden, pulling all the strings from the shadows." I felt the weight of his words, the magnitude of what he was saying. Everything I thought I knew was unraveling, and I had no choice but to follow the thread. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The older man looked at me, his eyes narrowing, and then slowly shook his head. "You're looking for answers that might just break you," he warned. "But I'll tell you this, your own blood is involved in this game." My heart stopped. "What?" I whispered. The older man's voice softened, almost pitying. "Your brother, David. He's been at the top of the pyramid this whole time, playing both sides. He's the one who orchestrated everything, the rise of the empire, and its fall." I stumbled back, the words crashing into me like a wave. "No, you're lying," I gasped, my mind reeling. He couldn't be serious. Could he? My brother? "You're just trying to throw me off," I said. But even as I said the words, doubt crept in. I couldn't process it. The idea that my own brother, the one person I trusted above all, could be involved in something so monstrous. It was too much. My mind raced. "I need to see him. Where is he?" I demanded, my voice shaky. The older man didn't respond immediately. He just sat there, staring at me with cold eyes. Finally he spoke. "You'll find him at the old family estate. But be warned, David. Once you step through that door, there's no going back." The weight of his words settled in the air. I didn't know if I was ready for what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to confront him. For better or worse, I had to face my brother. I left the warehouse with a sense of urgency, my footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The family estate loomed ahead, an imposing mansion that once held nothing but warmth and memories. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. The gates were open, as if inviting me into the belly of the beast. As I walked through the front doors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every step I took was being calculated. I found him in the study, sitting behind a desk, his eyes cold and unreadable. "You shouldn't have come, David," my brother said, his voice empty of warmth. "You've already lost." The silence between us was thick with tension, the weight of years of lies and betrayal hanging in the air. My brother didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared at me, like I was a stranger. "I knew you'd come here," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "You always did have that righteous streak. But you're too late. It's all done." I felt my chest tighten, the words sinking into my bones. "What do you mean it's done?" I asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. My brother leaned back in his chair, the faintest trace of a smirk playing at his lips. "It was never about you, David. You were just a pawn in a much larger game. I control everything now." I shook my head, trying to push back the shock. "You really think you've won, don't you?" I spat, my voice rising. My brother's smirk widened, but his eyes were empty. "I've always won, David. That's the thing you never understood. This world isn't about morals or family. It's about power." My mind raced. The betrayal had come from someone I'd trusted, someone I thought was my ally. And now I was left with nothing but the truth. A truth that was too painful to bear. "You're not my family anymore," I said, my words cold and final. "You're just another enemy." He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Then we're done, brother. Let's see who walks out of here alive." The standoff between us was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity. "You've become everything you said you hated," I said through gritted teeth. My brother stood up slowly, walking around the desk. "And you're still the naive kid who believes in honor." The world doesn't work that way. His voice was chilling, devoid of any warmth. He was no longer the person I had once looked up to. He was something else entirely, a monster hidden behind a mask of power. "I'm going to bring this empire down, starting with you," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "You'll never get away with this." My brother's expression shifted, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You don't understand, David," he said quietly. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to destroy you." His words were almost a confession, but they only made my anger burn brighter. "Then why, Nick? Why destroy everything we built?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Why betray the family?" He looked away, as if the answer was too painful to say. "Because I had to. I wasn't going to let anyone control me anymore. Not even you." I clenched my jaw. "And you thought this was the answer? Betraying everyone you ever cared about?" He didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, his back now facing me. I knew this moment had been coming. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, like a storm brewing. My brother, the man I once called family, was lost to the darkness. I had no choice but to end it. "This is over, Nick," I said softly, but my voice was filled with conviction. "I'll do what has to be done." The finality of the words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Paul." He slowly turned around, his face expressionless. "You're right," he said, his tone flat. "It's over." Without another word, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun, pointing it directly at me. The seconds stretched into eternity. The gun in Nick's hand trembled slightly, but I knew it wasn't fear. It was resolve. "This is the end, David," he said coldly, the words slicing through the air like a blade. "You never understood. I never wanted to do this, but you left me no choice." I looked him in the eye, the man who had once been my closest ally. "You've always had a choice, Nick. You just chose the wrong one," I said, my voice steady despite the fear trying to claw at my insides. "You don't have to do this." But I knew he already had. There was no turning back. His eyes flickered with something, regret maybe, but he didn't lower the gun. I couldn't understand him anymore. The brother I knew, the one who had shared so many memories with me, was gone. "Why, Nick?" I asked quietly. "Why betray me? Why betray the family?" His face twisted, the anger in his eyes building as he stepped closer. "The family," he spat. "The family is dead, David. It was never about family. It was about control. Power. You never saw that, did you? You were always the naive one, too blinded by loyalty to see the truth." My heart sank, the words cutting deep. I had always believed in loyalty, in family, but now I saw the harsh truth for what it was, a lie. The empire we had built was a house of cards, and I had been holding it together. Nick's words hit harder than any blow could. "You were never meant to be the one in charge," he continued, his voice low and venomous. "I was, and you've always known that. That's why you're weak. You always wanted to save the world, but in doing so, you lost yourself." I shook my head, struggling to keep my composure. "I didn't lose myself. I lost you," I said, my voice trembling with raw emotion. "You were my brother, my family. And now you've become everything we fought against." He didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes hardened. "I'm everything you could never be. And that's why I'm standing here, and you're not. You're too weak to understand power." The silence was deafening. Every word Nick spoke felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, crushing me under the truth of his betrayal. But I wouldn't break. "You'll never control everything, Nick," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's always someone stronger. Someone willing to fight for what's right." Nick laughed bitterly. "Right?" he scoffed. "What's right? What's right is that I'm in control now, and you're nothing. A ghost, just like the rest of the family." I didn't move. I couldn't. "Then you're nothing too," I said. "You're just another man who thought power meant everything. But in the end, it means nothing." His eyes flashed with anger. "You think you're in control now?" You think you can walk away from this? He hissed, taking a step closer. The gun in Nick's hand remained steady, aimed directly at me. But I knew deep down that there was one last chance, one last move I could make. Do it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. End this. End it all. But know this, Nick. You will never be what you think you are. You're just a man who sold his soul. His hand trembled slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like he might lower the gun. But then, without warning, he raised it again, aiming directly at my chest. You don't get to lecture me, David, he said, his voice filled with venom. You're the one who's weak. And now, it's too late. The gunshot rang out, and everything went black. The gunshot echoed through the empty halls of the mansion, its sound sharp and final, but the pain didn't come right away. My body, numb and disoriented, took a moment to process the reality. I fell to the floor, the cold marble beneath me like a cruel reminder of the life I had led. A drop of blood splattered on the ground, and the weight of betrayal settled into my chest. I gasped for air, my hand clutching at the wound. Nick, I whispered, barely able to speak. Why now? The blurry figure standing above me was none other than Nick, my brother, my ally, the one I trusted above all else. His face twisted with a mixture of regret and indifference. His eyes were cold, devoid of any hint of emotion. David, he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. It was always going to end this way. I warned you, but you never listened. The last of my strength was spent as I tried to push myself up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. You said you were with me, I rasped, my voice breaking. You said we would destroy this empire together. Nick's lips curled into a faint smirk. You were just a pawn, David, a tool in my plan. The king is dead, and you... He paused, looking down at me with a sad, almost pitying glance. You were never meant to lead. This was never your fight. My heart sank as the blood drained from my body, but the sting of betrayal cut deeper than any wound ever could. I could barely focus. Every word Nick spoke felt like a distant echo. The Empire, David. It's not just about us. It's about power. And you were always too weak to understand that. He continued, his voice devoid of emotion. You thought loyalty mattered, but it doesn't. It never did. The words reverberated in my mind, and I found myself choking on the bitter taste of truth. Power. That was all it ever was. All we ever were. Just pieces in a game played by people who never cared about us. You're wrong, I managed to say, my voice hoarse. Loyalty means something. You can't destroy everything just to hold on to power. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Nick had already won. The game was over. I could feel the darkness closing in, but something inside me refused to surrender. You're wrong, Nick, I said again, the words coming more easily now, despite the blood spilling from my chest. This isn't just about power. It's about who we are, who we were supposed to be. Nick's face twisted in frustration. Stop deluding yourself. This was never about who you were supposed to be. It was always about survival. His voice was hard, unyielding. And you didn't survive. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle between us. Maybe not, I whispered. But I did what was right. Nick's silence was deafening. I could feel the tension in the room, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. I looked up at him one last time, my voice barely above a whisper. Hi. You'll never escape it. The Empire, the blood you've spilled. It's all going to haunt you. Nick's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but the mask quickly returned. I already know that, David, he said, his voice low and filled with a strange sense of finality. But I'm still in control, and that's all that matters. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that control meant nothing if you were already lost. But there were no more words. No more fights left. The damage was done. The silence lingered for what felt like an eternity. But then, as if on cue, the door to the room opened, and a shadow appeared in the doorway. I turned my head, too weak to do anything but watch. The figure stepped forward, the sound of their footsteps loud in the silence. It was him, the true mastermind, the one who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, the one who controlled it all. Nick's face drained of color. You knew?" he asked, his voice trembling. The figure nodded slowly, a cold smile spreading across their face. "I've always known, Nick. It's time for you to step aside. The true war was just beginning."